Good morning, Rock Church. How's everybody doing? Good? Did you guys all enjoy your extra hour of sleep this morning? Yeah, wrong direction. Yeah, you are right. So, hey, I want to take just a quick second. If you are joining online, if you're at the C3 Coffee Bar, wherever you might be, just thank you for joining in with us and being a part of The Rock. Let's give it up for everybody online and in those locations. Yeah. And, you might also be here this morning. It might be your first time with us. Might be first time you've ever been here. And if that's the case, man, thank you for coming. I know there's a lot of things you could do on a Sunday morning. And the fact that you've chosen to come to church or to join in online, man, that's just a big deal. So thank you for doing that. And I hope you enjoy today. We're gonna talk about this series that we launched last week called This Is For Everyone. And, when we launch this series, it's really to help get us into Easter, all right? So it's a series that's going to take us into Easter. And if you were here in this auditorium, if you're in Conway, then you know there's a card on your chair, right? And you held up those if you were here earlier, and Clay was on this campus, and he said you did very good. You remember that? Did you catch that? The way he said it? Yeah, I figured you'd get on him about that. But seriously, about that card, it's very important. Pick out what service you're going to attend. Pick out what service you're going to serve at. Think about the 39 or 49 or 59, however many people that you're going to invite and get them to come to church as well, all right? Take those cards. We have tons of them. I'd love for you to take a stack and take them to some of your friends, your coworkers, people you go to school with, and let them know about church, all right? So that'll be kind of our Easter series, and I know you'll love it. The other thing I talked about last week with This Is For Everyone is we launched kind of a new initiative that is going to kind of go along with the series for the next 8 weeks of how to help send some kids to camp and how to launch a church in Las Vegas. And we kind of called it the This Is For Everyone Fund. And what that was about, if you were here, you saw a video, and we talked about that we want camp to be for everyone and Vegas to be for everyone. Camp is critical at our church, and it really takes the entire church to do camp, all right? And I mean that from two different directions. One, if you're in middle school and you're in this room, meaning if you're in 5th grade through 7th grade right now, then our middle school camp is for you. And it's the last week of June, and you gotta go. It'll be phenomenal. So if you're in here and you're listening, the first thing you need to do when you leave church today is you need to say, Mom, Dad, let's go over to this gym corner and let's figure out what camp is, all right? If you're in high school, which would mean you're currently in 8th grade through graduates, all right? You would be going to high school camp. That's the first week of July. If you sign up by the early bird date, I heard you get this really cool shirt that I can't explain, but I guess they can, all right? So if you're in high school and you're in this room, or if you're like, dude, I'd really like to have that shirt, sign up for high school camp, okay? Because we need leaders as well, but would love for you to go. Don't miss out on a great opportunity. But bottom line is we know it costs a lot of money, and some students, between them and their family, they can afford to pay, others can't. Or others can only afford to pay a certain amount. So every year we raise between $20,000 and $25,000 in scholarships just to help send kids to camp. So that's what the This Is For Everyone Fund is. It's to help send kids to camp. And so I want to encourage you, if you call The Rock home, or if you're just like, no, I want to help send a kid to camp, then you can give to that fund. We're hoping for $20,000, $25,000 just for that. But in addition to that, we're wanting to launch Vegas. And we have some money set aside for Vegas, but we want to kind of add to that money. So anything above what we need for camp, we're going to send straight towards Vegas. And so my goal is over the next 8-9 weeks that above our regular giving, that about $50,000 will come in to take care of these two things. So it's really going to be one of those things that camp and Vegas is for everyone. And you can do that in the normal ways. Most of y'all give here at the church is you do it through online giving or text to give, or there is buckets and boxes, and you can give that way as well. If you have questions about that, go to the Connect Corner. But here's one question I always get is why Vegas? And part of the reason Vegas is because people there need to understand something that we're going to hit today, and that is that church is for everyone. that we need to go to Las Vegas because there's people there that just don't think church is for them. And I remember that from an encounter I had with a girl one day. And it's an encounter that happened years ago, but it still haunts me. It still is one of those experiences that I'll never forget. And what it was is me and my buddy, we were walking through the streets. We were downtown Las Vegas, Fremont Experience, if you're familiar with Vegas. And as we were walking, we were just kind of doing ministry. Now, we weren't walking with signs or with bullhorns or anything like that. We were walking and just being nice to people because that's what Christians should do, right? Because that's what Christians should do, right? Be nice to me in reply, okay? But anyway, so we're just, doing that and just having conversations with people. And at one point, we got into this conversation with this girl named Trisha. And she was a dancer. It's very obvious she was a dancer by the costume she was wearing. And she was standing out in front of her dance establishment. And we started talking to her and ended up getting into a 10, 15-minute long, very good conversation, actually very vulnerable, where she just shared some of her struggles about some of her addiction. She shared with her struggles about being a single mom and her child. And at one point, I just asked her, I said, Trisha, have you ever thought about just going to church? And she just looked at me and kind of like gave me that look like, and then she said this. She said, why would I do that? She said, there's no way any church would ever accept me. And it broke my heart because what she was saying is not that I don't need God, not that I don't need help. It's the church isn't the place where I'm going to find that. And that just destroyed me because I just want to say, no, the church is for you. But in her mind, it wasn't for her. So we've got to do everything we can to carry this message out to the world that the church is for everyone. But I understand because maybe you're here this morning and you're like, yeah, I might be more in Trisha's boat. I don't know if the church is really for me. And I hope this morning over the next 30 minutes to help us see something different. Now, I know sometimes it can be hard to go to church. All right, sometimes it can be hard because you'll be thinking, well, that church isn't for me, solely based off the name of the church. All right, and here's what I mean. Like sometimes churches just choose really bad names. And you're like, I don't want to go to that church. Like, for instance, maybe this one. Boring United Methodist Church. Like, you want to go to Boring with me? No. And I know that's just the name of their town, but just because it's the name of your town doesn't mean you have to name your church after the name of your town. Like this one, Sorry Christian Church. Like, no joke, this church is literally a few miles away from where my wife grew up, all right? Like, what's your church like? Sorry, It's like, that's not good, all right? Here's another one. Country Club Baptist Church. Now, here's what they've done. They named their church after the road they were on. Guys, let me just give you some advice. Don't name your church after your road if your road is Country Club, all right? You're conveying a message that isn't really what you want to convey, all right? Here's another one. Halfway Baptist. What are you? I don't know. You know what I mean? It's just like, we couldn't decide, And I guess it was halfway in between two towns or something. But again, bad name. And then this next one, this is like South Carolina, all right? This is like For Real Church. Hellhole Swamp Baptist Church. Like, that's a real church in South Carolina, okay? Like, literally, I was talking to my assistant, Leanna, about it, and she goes, oh, yeah, that's a real place. She goes, oh, my friend, she's Miss Hellhole Swamp. I said, what? She goes, oh, yeah, she won the festival and everything. And I'm just like, all right, that's crazy, you know what I mean? But anyway, so that's another one. And then how about this one? Real church. Run for Your Life Chapel. like, no, run for your life. I'm telling you, don't go to my church, you know what I mean? Like, bad church name. Believers Church. And you might read that and go, well, that's not that bad. Yet what's it conveying? It's only for believers. Like, you can only come to this church if you already have faith in God, if you already believe in Jesus. So again, it's a bad connotation. Now, here's some other names of churches. Now, these are made up ones by me, but they probably hit close to home. Perfect people preferred church, right? Like maybe you felt that before, like there's a church that you could only go to if you're perfect, or how about this one? No, let me back up. No food or drink allowed church, right? Like no food or drink allowed in the auditorium. We got to keep it nice and clean. Or as you saw the other one, proper attire required church, right? Been to that one, you know what I'm saying? And we have proper attire here at The Rock. I don't know if you know that. Wear something, okay? That's pretty much it, all right? Segregated Saints Church. Ooh. That one hits a little closer, doesn't it? And unfortunately, again, these are made up names, but they could be names that people put on the front of their church. And guys, I just want to make sure at The Rock, those are never things that could be said about us. Segregated saints or perfect people preferred. No, probably the better sign to put on the front of our church building would be no perfect people allowed, right? Because none of us are perfect, all right? You know, none of us, not myself, none of you all, like none of us are perfect, all right? And so the church is for all of us because we've all sinned, we've all made mistakes, and we all need Jesus, all right? You can put a sign on the front of our church that says, this is for everyone church. Or you can put a sign on the church that says, come as you are church, or you matter to God church. Because that's what we're trying to proclaim to the world, all right? That's the reason we do church at Coastal, because we want students to know that they matter to God. We want families to know in the Carolina Forest area that they matter to God. It's the reason we do church at J. Reuben, because we want the residents of J. Reuben to know that they matter to God. It's the reason we'll go to downtown Las Vegas, because we need people in the industry to realize that there's a church there that is for them because they matter to God. It's the reason we do church in Africa, in Dominican, around the world, because people matter to God. And we've got to do everything we can to proclaim that message that you can be made right with God. And the bottom line is this: if we want to make it hard to get to hell, we have to make it easy to go to church. You hear that? If we want to make it hard to go to hell, then we have to make it easy to go to church. And that's exactly what Paul was proclaiming when he wrote the book of Romans. When he wrote it to a small group of Christians, mostly Jewish, who were living in the epicenter of the world, he was telling them, listen, we've got to make it easy to come to Christ. And that's what I tried to explain last week when we looked at Romans chapter 1, verse 16. And I'm going to read it again. And last week we spent 25 minutes on this verse. Today I'm going to spend 15 seconds. But just as a reminder, it says this: for I am not ashamed of this good news about Christ. It is the power of God at work, saving everyone who believes. The gospel in a nutshell, the good news, here's the simplest way I could say it. It's the story about how we can be made right with God through what Jesus did on the cross. That's the good news. That's the gospel. And it's for everyone, for the Jew first and also for the Gentile. And then what Paul does is he spends the next several chapters explaining what that means. That he starts talking about for the Gentiles, all right? He goes through this list and he says they've made some mistakes. They're worshiping false gods. They're making up gods. They're making up sins, and they've gone off the deep end. And the Jews who would have been reading Romans 1, that first part of that letter, as they read it, they would have looked at that and went, yeah, Paul, you get those Gentiles. But then he says in Romans 2, all right, now back then when they would have read it, it would have just been the very next paragraph, all right? The very next paragraph, he says this: but you Jews are no different. You're sinning in the exact same way. And the Gentiles and the Jews will suffer the consequence of your sin, and the Gentiles and the Jews will receive the rewards and the blessings for the good things you do. And what he's meaning by the good things you do is when you surrender your life to Jesus Christ and then start living for him, you will be blessed because of it. And that is for everyone. But then he says this in this very next verse. It's Romans chapter 2, verse 11. After he just goes through and tells them that you're either going to be judged or you're going to be judged, but you're either going to be judged and suffer the consequences or you're going to be judged and receive a reward. He then says this, for God does not show favoritism. Now, when we read that, we're like, okay. But I want you to know, like at that moment, that would have been Paul dropping the mic. All right, that would have been like, I've got something to say and I'm dropping it and leaving it there because you're going to have to process for a little while. That would have been that moment where the Jews went, whoa, time out. God doesn't show favoritism. Wait, we're the Jewish people. We are the favored race. We are the favored faith. Like, what do you mean that God doesn't show favoritism? And what Paul is really pushing into right then when he's saying that is he's looking at the Jews and he's saying, for one, God doesn't show racial favoritism. And he doesn't show any racial favoritism. And the Jews would struggle with that, all right? Because the Jews knew they were the chosen people. They were the favored race, all right? And let me explain this difference between Jew and Gentiles. I told you last week I would do this weekend. That the Jews were a race of people and they were also a faith-based people, all right? They were both. And as a race, they were all from the same bloodline and they'd received the promise of God that they were going to be the chosen nation that was going to bring about the Messiah. Now, when the Jews heard that, they thought, oh, we're the favored race, the chosen people, that we get to reign as rulers of the world. But God is saying, no, you're the chosen people for which I am going to bring my Savior through. And you guys, through your people, you're going to change the world. Not a favored race that you are more important than other races. God doesn't show racial favoritism. God loves the human race. Period, all right? Doesn't matter what color skin you have. Doesn't matter from where in the world you are. He loves everyone. The human race. And that was a struggle they were having back then. But let's be honest, it's a struggle we still have today. It's a struggle that we've had, through the centuries of the world. It's a struggle that was going on in the 50s and 60s and 70s. It's a struggle that was going on that two of the best preachers since Jesus fought. And when I'm talking about those two, I'm talking about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Dr. Billy Graham. That those two were both in sync with one another as friends, doing everything they could to communicate to the world that God loves all people. And if you know Dr. Graham's story, if you don't, go watch, go learn, figure it out, okay? But I know in the office this week, I was sitting around, and on Monday, Kaylock and his wife Hannah, they said, Josh, did you watch the Billy Graham special on Fox? I was like, no, I didn't see it. They were like, oh, wow, dude, you got to go watch it, all right? So I'd say the same to you if you haven't. It's on Fox.com. Go watch it. But the things I learned about Billy Graham in it, I was blown away. And I've seen him preach. I went to one of his crusades in Indianapolis. But the thing I didn't know is how in sync him and Dr. King were when it came to racial reconciliation. I didn't realize how much they were working together. And some of the things that I learned through this special was about how Billy Graham would not hold his crusades if they segregated people. Like he was in Arkansas and he told them, no, you've got to allow people to sit where they want to sit. You've got to remove those ropes. President Clinton said that what Billy Graham did during that crusade brought a major difference into his state because for the first time, whites and blacks worshiped together. Said for the first time when people received Christ and they came forward to the altar, when they came forward to respond to Christ, they walked together, they walked hand in hand, sharing tears. Billy Graham was saying what I'm saying today, and he's Billy Graham, so he said it a whole lot better. So let's watch him for just 45 seconds of what he thought about this idea of God doesn't show racial favoritism.
Now, Jesus was a man. He was human. He was not a white man. He was not a black man. He came from that part of the world that touches Africa and Asia and Europe, and he probably had a brown skin, very much like some of the Indian people here today. Christianity is not a white man's religion, and don't let anybody ever tell you that it's white or black. Christ belongs to all people. He belongs to the whole world. His gospel is for everyone, whoever you are. The scripture says.
Amen. You believe it? So just as we're in this theme saying this is for everyone, Billy Graham said it, that would have been 50 years ago. He said the gospel is for everyone. And if the gospel is for everyone, then that means the church is for everyone. And man, I'm thankful here at The Rock that we are getting more and more diverse every week, it seems. That I truly believe that here at our church, that it doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter if you're white, if you're black, if you're Latino, if you're Asian, if you're Native American. This place is for everyone. But I feel like we got to speak into it just a little bit. And I'm going to just say this right off the top. I am not an authority on this issue. I'm not trying to even claim to be. All right? I'm a white guy that grew up in the Midwest in a town that was 95, 96, 97% Caucasian. So I can't speak as an authority as someone who's walked it or lived it. But I do have some life experience. One of those reasons why is if you don't know my family, we are a biracial family. All right, we have in our household, we have white and we have black. Our two youngest kids have been adopted from Haiti, and I'll just tell you this, that we love the fact that we are multiracial. We celebrate the fact that we have multicolor skin in our family. And we love it. Now, it doesn't mean that it's always easy. I can tell you times, I remember when the kids were younger that maybe I'd be going through the grocery store and I'd have Tate with me and you know, when he was 2 or 3 and he'd be sitting in the grocery cart and I'd be walking through this all white town as a white guy with a black child. And I can tell you, I got tons of looks, you know. And I didn't think much about it. I was just like, don't worry about them. It got worse though, or it hit my heart in a different way when things like this would happen. When maybe my wife and I and just our 2 youngest kids would go out to dinner and we'd walk into a restaurant and we'd step up to the booth and we clearly walked in all 4 together, but then the person would say, do you need a table for 2? And I'm just like, are they not right here? You know what I mean? And it hurt. You know what I mean? It hurt me. I was afraid of how it might hurt my kids. And I don't like it, obviously. I hate it. But even at that, I haven't walked through their shoes or maybe your shoes. I ended up sitting down over the last couple months with several of the African American men and women of our church and our community. And I said, I just want to hear your story. I just want to know, what was it like for you growing up wherever you grew up, whether you grew up here, whether you grew up in some other city. I just want to know what it's like. What was it like for you the first time you came into The Rock? Were you warmly received? Were you loved? And I heard a lot of great stories, but I also heard some heart-wrenching stories. Some heart-wrenching stories of, because I worked hard and I was able to buy a nice car, people thought I was either selling or that I had stolen it. That I drove by churches knowing I'm not allowed to go to that church. One of the ladies I talked to grew up in the days of segregation when it was still in full force or whatever you want to call that. And some of the stories she shared with me just broke my heart. But one encouraged me greatly. She was a girl. She was the only African-American girl in her entire school. And one day they were getting ready for a Christmas pageant. And she was standing in line with about 20 other white girls. They were all angels. And she said the teacher started with the first little angel and started putting lip gloss on her. And as she started going down the row, that this lady immediately thought, there's no way she'll put lip gloss on me. That I know she's going to pass right over me. Even though she was young, she was only in kindergarten, that she knew that lady's not going to allow that lip gloss to hit my lips and then touch some white girl's lips. But when that teacher got to her, she put that lip gloss on her just like she did every other kid. And that lady said, it changed my life because she saw me as another young girl. And what that teacher did, and I'll never know that teacher, but I'm so thankful that teacher saw just a bunch of kindergarten girls and didn't see somebody who was different. You know what I mean? And as a church, we need to proclaim that. We need to celebrate differences, all right? Celebrate differences in unity and love one another. But to do that, here's what we need to do. We need to make sure we're not showing favoritism, because this is what I really believe. I believe that we're probably not struggling with hatred. All right, now I know that maybe you're here and maybe you do. I don't know. And again, I'm not trying to talk like an authority on that issue. But I would at least say what I feel from a church perspective is that there's not hatred, but there is favoritism. And we need to recognize that, because favoritism is a sin. Look at what it says in James chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. Yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal laws found in the scriptures. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor. It doesn't matter where your neighbor is from. It doesn't matter what their socioeconomic level is. It doesn't matter what the color of their skin is. It doesn't matter what their belief system is. Love your neighbor as yourself. But if you favor some people over others, you're committing a sin. Which means when you're showing bias. So ask yourself right now, and this is just between you and you, or you and God, if that's how you want it, all right? But do you show favoritism? Do you show bias? If you're a student, how often do you find yourself in conversation with those who are of a different race? How often do you find yourself, if you're a worker, hanging out and having conversations with a coworker of a different race? It's easy for me to ask it this way if you're a parent. If you're a parent, are you okay if your child has good friends who have different skin color? If you're a parent, are you okay if your child spends the night with somebody who is of a different skin color? What if your child comes home and says, I want to date this person who has a different skin color? Or your child comes home and says, I want to marry this person who has a different skin color. Or we're going to adopt, and when we adopt, we're going to adopt a child of a different skin color. And it doesn't matter which direction that's going. That's a question for anybody, no matter what kind of diversity that you have in your life. And maybe in your heart, you're like, I'm good. Oh. And maybe on one of those questions, you felt something kind of in your spirit. And if that's the case, I just ask you just to wrestle with that. Wrestle with it. And I know that's tough, but we need to wrestle with it. You know why? Because it shows a little bit of favoritism and bias probably, which is a sin. Because we have to love all people, everyone. And if we don't, it's a sin. And we got to deal with that. And that's what Paul was saying. He was telling the Jews that God doesn't show racial favoritism. But he also said this. He said, but he also doesn't show religious favoritism. And let me explain that, all right? This is what that meant for Paul and that group, that the Jews believed they were a favored race, but they also believed that they were the right faith. And they were the right faith when you talk about relationship with God. Where they struggled in their faith is they thought if anybody wanted to have faith in God, then they had to practice their religion the exact same way they did. All right. Even the Jews who put their faith in the Messiah. All right. That once they put their faith in Jesus, they said, okay, so you're telling us that Jesus died for all people and that we have to let the Gentiles come in. Now understand a Gentile. A Gentile would have been anybody who was not a Jew. Anybody. All right. If you're not Jewish, you were a Gentile. So the Jews are going, wait, you're telling me I have to let those people into my life and into my relationship with God? Okay, if that's what you're saying, but they do things different than us. And they eat things that we don't eat. So the Jewish Christians, what they ended up saying is they struggled with it because they said, okay, yeah, we'll let you come and be a part of us, but you can no longer do the things you've been doing. And you can no longer eat the things you've been eating, and you have to take the knife. You're like, what's that mean? They got to be circumcised. And right now you're thinking, oh, I'm going to have a conversation over lunch with my child right now. Because I have to go there for just a quick second. And I'm not going to try to be crass or anything like that, but I want you to think about that for a second. Most of us men, we get it, but we didn't understand it because we were a little bitty baby, right? But imagine a Gentile who's coming to faith in Jesus when he's 30 years old. And this 30-year-old Gentile says, okay, yes, I want Jesus. Now, what are you telling me I got to do? Well, you got to quit doing all those things you were doing, and you can't eat that bacon anymore, and you have to take the knife. Well, what do you mean I have to take the knife? Well, you have to get circumcised. And you can imagine a 30-year-old dude going, what? And here would be their statement, I bet. What's that have to do with Jesus? But aren't we guilty of the same thing? Yeah, come on into church. We want you to come to church. But if you come, then you got to make sure you have the right clothes on. Like if you come, you can come, but have the proper attire, and don't park in my spot, and don't sit in my seat, and don't get me dirty, and make sure you worship the same way I worship. Oh, a little quiet in here right now, y'all. But you see what I'm getting at? That sometimes that's what we've done, and we have to understand that wasn't the message Jesus was shoving out there, throwing out there, telling the people. He was saying, no, I died for you, come to me. Come to me. And too many times we think we've got to behave right and we've got to believe right. And if we behave right and believe right, then we can belong. But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, no, you belong. And here at The Rock, I want you to know you belong. That if you're just in this situation right now where you're going, I'm trying to investigate who Jesus is, you belong here. If you're in a situation right now where you got a bunch of junk going on in your life, and I don't have to preach about it right now because you know you do. You belong. This place is here for you right now because what Jesus presented was this idea that I want you to belong so that you can believe. And guys, I'll tell you, that's my number one desire for each and every one of you here. That's the number one desire for everybody on staff here, for the elders here, for the leaders here, is that we want every man, woman, and child that ever comes to church here, that ever views online, that is around the world. We want every man, woman, and child to come into a relationship with Jesus, to believe in him. But we also know that step of belief often happens when you first start to belong. So you belong. You team up. You start serving. You get into a small group, even if you don't believe yet. Get involved because we want you to belong so that you can believe. And then this is what we firmly believe. When you believe, then that's going to help you as you continue to pursue that relationship with God. It's going to help you become more like him and live the life he's calling you to live. We're not about behavior modification. We're about becoming more like Jesus. And that's what we all need to do, right? Because last time I checked, we're all still sinners. This is what Jesus said. Jesus answered them, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who knew they are sinners and need to repent. That those who know they are sinners. And last time I checked, we're all sinners and we all need Jesus. And that's the reason the church and this church is for everyone. That's what it means. So we're gonna move into a time of response right now. And here's what I want to challenge you with. Is to really think through what you've heard. And maybe for you this morning, maybe what you need to hear right now is an apology. And here's what I mean by that. Maybe you're here this morning and you've been burnt by church. You've been hurt by church. You've been burnt or hurt by a pastor. And maybe you're here right now and you're saying that and it's not about the past. It's about maybe you've been hurt by this church. Or maybe you've been hurt by this pastor. And if that's the case, man, I'm sorry. Like if I've ever, maybe we've seen each other out in public, but I didn't see you, but you saw me. Or maybe you thought I saw you, but I didn't recognize you. Guys, that would never be intentional. I hope you know that. That I would never do anything to intentionally hurt you. But on behalf of myself, on the church, or a church in the past, as a guy who's been a pastor since I was 20 years old, let me apologize on behalf of whoever it is that maybe hurt you, or whatever church. And if that has happened in your life, then I'm going to ask you to do something this morning. Drop that rock. Let it go. Because we're all sinners, myself included. And I don't want you to hold on to that bitterness because God's got something so much better for you. So let it go. Or maybe you're here this morning and the way you need to respond is you recognize, and as painful as it is, that maybe there's some favoritism in there. Maybe it's a favoritism towards somebody of a different race that you're holding a bias against them. Or maybe it's a bias towards somebody who has a lifestyle issue, or maybe bias towards somebody who's different than you. And you're just like, man, I need to let that go because I need to love them as myself. I need to love them because Jesus says they matter. So I want to invite you to do that. Or maybe what it is this morning is maybe you're here and you're just like, I need to be a part of a church like this. But more than being a part of a church like this, you need to be a part of his church. And maybe this morning you're just like, I'm ready to believe in this Jesus guy because I need a new life. And I need the salvation. I need the forgiveness. All right, maybe that's the word you'd use in your heart. That I need the forgiveness that he offers. And if that's you, man, I just want to ask you to make a commitment this morning and say, yes, I want to put my faith in Jesus. And I want to be a part of his church, the church. And we've got people that'll be back at the Connect Corner, just right there, just at the back of the room. While we're singing, I invite you to go there. Just go there and talk to somebody about that. Maybe while we're singing, you're going to take communion. If you're here in the auditorium, communion's on the front of the stage. If you're at C3, it's up at the front of the room. And communion, the way it happens here at The Rock, it's just real simple. There's bread and there's juice there. And over these next two songs, that you can just spend some time thanking Jesus, that you matter to him. But then also, when you're doing that, reflect on what he's put into your heart today. And guys, I just challenge you, don't skip out on this time with God, but spend these next 12 minutes spending time with him and allowing him to do work in your heart. Would you stand with me? Let's pray together. Jesus, I thank you for this morning. And I just pray right now, Jesus, that we would give it all to you. And God, I know we're talking about some tough things, but God, this is your church. It's your church, God. It's not my church. It's not our elders' church. It's your church. And we want to do everything we can to make sure that this body here is a true reflection of how you want your church to be. So God, help us to live that as individuals. God, help us to just simply respond to the things we've discovered this morning. In your name, amen. Let's spend some time responding.